Silver Society.
Welcome to the Silver Eye Society podcast, the podcast where we look at film to find the old themes behind our modern issues. I'm changing it up from ancient themes because I realize some of these are not ancient themes. I don't know, but it sounds cooler. Maybe I should go back to that. We're working on
prehistoric themes. That's what I do.
It's metal. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
We are looking at the film today, Don't Look Up. This is a new one. We don't usually do this, and I'm going to tell you why we don't usually do newer films in a moment. This is the Netflix movie that just came out recently with Leonardo DiCaprio, Jennifer Lawrence. They just packed this fucking movie full of celebrities, which is how you know to be a little suspicious of the quality of a film. Now, I have criticisms that we will get into. I particularly like the ending of this movie. That's what saves it, which is a whole theme that we're going to talk about. The idea of gratitude, the idea of existential absurdism. That's something that you see in this movie. And but there are some other themes in this movie that are important, prescient, very much worth discussion. Particularly the idea of the elite as being ignorant and, although powerful, incompetent, and the population as being ignorant as well and complacent, and how these things create, essentially, an apocalyptic situation. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about, can we ever solve problems again? That's one of the main themes in this movie, is the inability to solve a problem. And one thing I did like about this movie is that they don't solve it. So it doesn't have particularly a happy ending. The ending's really good of this movie. We'll get into that. So let's jump right in. I would like to begin with a few criticisms and a review type thing. Since this is a new movie, I have a lot of them. But of course, you know, I concede my time to the word of the podcast.
The word of the podcast this episode is going to be a very simple word of the podcast. The word of the podcast is going to be the word comet. It's a fun, because this, look, it was a fun movie. I'll give it that, right?
Yeah, it was.
It was a break from some of the heavier stuff that we do. It's contemporary. All the people are chattering about it online, and we don't usually follow those trends, but you know,
we'll give the people what they want every now and then.
So I'm giving you an easy word of the podcast today. You know, comet. One of a class of celestial bodies which move about the sun in great elliptical orbits. We get this word circa 1200 from the Old French. Comet.
Comet is probably how they say it over there.
Old French, 12th century. So I don't know if they took the T off at the end at that point. Who knows?
Comet.
But anyway, from the Greek, auster, you get, think about that word, A-S-T-E-R, literally, or cometes, literally long-haired star, from come, hair of the head, which is of unknown origin. Now, all of that, we won't get into a great deal. It did make me think that the director that we both like, Ari Aster, it made me think, is that his real name, or did he decide to do a little of his own word etymology and name himself after after that? No one knows.
That'd be kind of weird. What the fuck does Auster mean? Oh my God, you're fucking up the word of the podcast. What's the point? What's the meaning? Break it down. Isn't austere, as you say, it sounds like the root of austerity.
Okay, this is why you don't do the word of the podcast and I do. A-S-T-E-R, what it actually sounds more like to me is like asteroid. No? Something like that. Not austere, that's A-U. But anyway.
Oh.
Listen, this is a fun word of the podcast, so just sit back and relax and don't try to do word archaeology, all right? Listen, this is what I enjoyed about this from, again, Edom Online, my favorite website. There was this idea, of course, there's been an idea for a long time, that comets or omens of ruin, pestilence, and the overthrow of kingdoms Haley established that they were periodic, not important. This was the fun part to me. Comet wine from 1833. You know what comet wine is?
That sounds really cool, whatever it is.
It does, right? It was this idea that normally comets were associated with terrible things and disasters and all that stuff, but then somehow along the line, someone thought maybe it was just a smart wine merchant. They said, actually, the vintage of the year that we might see a comet in the sky is particularly good, and they came up with this idea in 1833 of comet wine. That wine made in that year in which notable comets have been seen was reputed to have a superior flavor. So I just want everyone to understand that advertising and marketing has been going on well before the modern and the postmodern era. It's been going on for a long time. Comet wine, and now to you. Over to you.
Okay, excellent. That's a good point, though, about the comet having this whatever culture around it that sees it as a kind of, like, what did you say? That it ends things or something? I don't know.
I like to call it a harbinger of doom, but it's a portent, an omen, a bad omen. If you saw a comet in the sky, this is normal from medieval times. Because think about it, you're a peasant, you're wandering around a field.
Yeah, it's dark.
You're looking at the sky all the time because you don't have Netflix, and so you see like goats and
in the sky,
all kinds of things. Yeah, goats in the sky, all kinds of things, and that's astrology. Comet. And then you see a comet. That's something new. But in your medieval peasant mind, remember the heavens are set. They're set in stone. Things shouldn't be moving around like that. That makes no sense. Well, is that good news or bad news? It's probably bad news because all news for a peasant is bad news. Because at best, everyone just leaves you alone your peasant thing to do peasant things. Usually when any news happens, it means someone's coming to pillage your peasant parcel, and that's no good.
No, that's not. So comets are no good, negative. And that's what the comet is in this film. It is a harbinger of doom. So let's get into some brief criticisms I have of this film, okay? I think it starts really badly. And I don't know, take all of this part with a grain of salt because I'm very critical of new things. It's just how I am. I don't know, it's maybe a bias, whatever, but I have reasons. The pacing of the film overall is fucking weird, okay? The intro, the beginning of the film is incredibly offsetting because they thrust these two characters into my life and immediately want me to care about them and follow along with their urgent mission and embrace their eccentricities. But I don't know who the fuck these people are. There's no background on them. There's no relationship building. They're just these two random characters that are extremely eccentric. I don't like that because I don't like random people popping up in my life who are extremely eccentric and then demand my attention. So why would I like that in a movie? So I didn't like that. It took a while before I was actually invested in the film and cared. Once they got to the White House, I was basically like, okay, what's going on here? And then it kind of starts to develop from there into a few cliches and things. So there's all these random cuts throughout the film with like hippos and viruses and mountains and shit. And it's like, dude, this is not the 90s anymore. Like, that shit is not cool anymore. You got to be really careful when you do that. I almost don't know if it's ironic. That may even be ironic, but I have a feeling it's not. It just seems like an activist propaganda film when you do that, like the glaciers are melting and it's like fire, polar bear dying, some baby crying. It's, like, don't manipulate me like that. Make a movie. Don't just throw fucking frames at me. So I don't like that. And next, one of the larger criticisms I have of this film is that I think it's lazy. I think it's lazy in how it treats this divide between the experts and then like the denialists and the people in government. Like, the Meryl Streep character is so clearly Trump. The son is so clearly one of Trump's son. All the people that don't believe in the comet are so clearly Republican conservatives. Like, it's so obvious that it's fucking boring. The point of making a movie is that you understand the dynamics at play in the subject that you're addressing enough to not have to use these shorthand stereotypes. So once I can pick out literal stereotypes, I mean, you have the fucking, by the end, Meryl Streep's character is like wearing a trucker's hat and being like, they're coming to get you. I get it. I get it very easily. That's the thing, because it's like already a thing. So it's not anything new. It's not anything original. I don't like that because also, you know, it would serve the movie's message better not to rely on things that are already a problem and not to, you know, not to create these shorthand stereotypes as a way of getting across the message. I don't like that. I think it's lazy. It's tiresome to me.
So I think that that's not inaccurate. However, I don't hold this to the same standard because it is a comedy and a satire. So
yes. Well, quickly about that. The thing is,
sure.
when you make a movie like this, it will be forgotten very quickly and it won't be a classic. That's why you don't do this in art. You can do it. And it's funny. I laughed a lot of the times. I found it amusing. I got it. You know, I got it. That's the thing. When you make these movies that are so obvious, you get it. Everybody gets it because it looks like reality. And the thing is, no one's going to rewatch that. I'm never going to watch this movie again in my entire life. I don't want to watch it again. I enjoyed it while I watched it. I laughed. I was amused. I was interested. It's a good movie. It's entertaining, but it's not a classic. It has no staying power. It's tiresome. So that's why you don't do that if you want to make lasting art.
But I don't think they do. This is the person that made Step Brothers. I mean,
well, Step Brothers is awesome.
Okay, but it's good, but it's not lasting art. When I'm 90 years old,
I watched that movie a lot. Okay, to be honest,
I understand, and you're correct in that. Look, this isn't just comedy; it's satire. So it's trying to satirize everything that's been going on in the broader world, which a lot of people say is almost impossible because the world itself has become so absurd, which I think is true. I went into this also thinking this is going to be one of those things. And it is one of those things. It's a Netflix movie. All Netflix movies, exclusives, all these Amazon exclusives, they have the same look. They have the same aesthetics. They have something they share something similar, which is I won't say it's repulsive to me, but it's not.
It's not compelling.
But it isn't high art. It isn't even art. It's
entertainment.
Trash is the wrong word because I really don't want to be too hard on this movie. It's not into movie gulag. We'll talk about movie gulag later. It's not. No. We're not sending it to movie gulag.
Not at all.
It's genuinely funny in a lot of places. I actually think that all the performances were actually good. Leonardo DiCaprio's performance was good. I'm older. Another thing about this is me being older. I don't know who anyone is in this movie that's not already 50 or 60 years old. Not because I'm 50 or 60. Fuck off, please. But I hear these names. Like I saw these names. This is like Ariana Grande or some shit. And I'm like, I've heard that name, but this sounds like a Starbucks drink. I don't know who that is exactly. Jennifer Lawrence, even. I wasn't really familiar with who that is. So there's like this, for me watching this, there's also this movie of like, okay, I know who Kate Blanchett is and Leonardo DiCaprio and what's her name?
Meryl Streep.
Yeah, those. But anyway, look, satire is difficult. We live in a very difficult postmodern, hyper-real world right now. So it did what it set out to do about as good as it could do. I guess that's why I don't hate this movie, is because for what it was attempting to do, I thought it did a decent job. It didn't really, and I do think that it was, let's call it even-handed in some ways, in that it didn't exactly make a hero out of anybody. I did like the fact that it took every single person had their downfall and their weakness, but I think we might speak to that a little bit more in one of our later points. So in terms of my critique of it was that I'll never watch it again either. I don't even have Netflix. I stopped using Netflix years ago. I had to log into your account because everything looks the same and everything has this kind of just feel to it. It's not. And now I wonder though, and I've been wondering because I've noticed in myself an inability to enjoy things. over the last few years. We've talked about this is the word of the podcast and Jacob's Ladder and Hedonia. And so what I did enjoy, I was able to kind of sit back. This is funny. I was able to enjoy it a little bit, but that's maybe a broader, bigger problem. And I'm not saying that everyone shares it with me, but there is this feeling that you know what's coming in so many things, in so many films, and that there's this kind of almost it's like we as an audience almost have too much knowledge about the surrounding circumstances of a film or piece of art, which then prejudices us towards it. So like I know Leonardo DiCaprio's in this.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know he's I think a pretty big climate change advocate or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And so I already kind of know that's going to be one of the things just because he's there. And that's not good or bad. I'm just simply saying that we know so much as an audience, and most of it's trivia. It's unimportant. And that sets us into a certain, it's like I'm speaking I'll speak for myself. It's like we find it difficult to watch and to admire art in a lot of different forms because we already know the content and the form before we experience it, and we can't experience it just in and of itself. It's like we're always set back somehow because, and especially in a satire, we know. I'm having a difficult time.
I feel
exactly
like you're talking about the preconceptions that we come to the table with something. Because for me, that was one of the things that I wouldn't say biased me per se, but I very quickly picked up. Oh, this is a climate change film. Like this is largely a commentary on climate change because I was already primed to expect that after seeing Disaster Movie, Listen to the Scientists, and Leonardo DiCaprio. I can put those things together, and unlike maybe perhaps an older movie where I don't know any of the actors, I don't know the time period that it was created in. If you don't know enough about the culture or the country or the decade that it was created in, you actually don't have all those preconceptions that you can come to a film with. And when we watch something contemporary, we are of the time that it is being made, especially when it's in our own culture too. So you can come to something with so many preconceptions about what it's supposed to be and what it's going to tell you and what it's likely referencing because it's like it's your peer in a way, but even more so because we have so much knowledge about what's going on constantly.
But what's great about this, and that somewhat gets at what I was trying and failing to say, what's great about this is for someone slightly older than you, I actually am experiencing now the flip side of this, which is since I don't know who whoever the fuck it is, Grande and Mrs. Grande, see that, which is a relief, that then I don't have those preconceptions, and I don't need to. I'm not as filled with the trivia and the knowledge of these people. So maybe I could experience it even on a little. That's why maybe I experienced it on a less, or I maybe enjoy this film a little bit better because you probably know stuff about Ariana Grande or whatever that I don't, which would then play into that. I don't know. It doesn't go to movie gulag. I'll end by saying I don't believe this should be sent to the movie gulag. I don't.
Okay,
I enjoyed it, but let's move to speak to the.
The only thing I'll say also is that this movie is redeemed by the ending. That's actually what makes it the best, is that the ending changes the tone of the movie and adds such a deeper philosophical idea to the film that it redeems it for me. Not that everything else in it totally ruined it, but it does the ending so well. It gets the ending so right that I am willing to tolerate the things that I didn't like about it. So let's discuss Incompetent Elites and the ignorant population, because that's one of the major themes in this movie, and of course it is very prescient. I think that there's a lot going on, right, that makes us question the competence of our leaders. And of course the pandemic is one. Climate change is another. That is something that we might argue that those in power that can do something about these issues don't do something. Now, I'm not going to get into the climate change argument. I'm not going to discuss how urgent we should be dealing with it. Granted, I agree with the movie's point that we're probably not doing what we could do, because that's true for basically everything nowadays. There are incredibly intelligent, skilled, wonderful people able to do things about problems that we have, but they're not in the position to do things. And even if they were, they're blocked and held back by a lot of what you see in this film, which is bureaucracy, egoism, all these extra layers that are added to the systems that you would use to solve a problem. And you see that in the beginning of the film when they think, okay, now we're going to get this problem solved. We're going to go to the president, we're going to tell them the problem, and that's it. Those are the people that are going to know what to do. They're going to handle this. Now, that's an important part on many levels, because on the one hand, you realize that that is actually not where the problem ends. That's where a new problem begins. But on the other hand, there's this desire right there that if we just put this problem in the right hands, it'll be solved. And that, I think, is another point that this movie makes, maybe more subtly, maybe accidentally, which is, are we so complacent as a population that we expect our problems to be solved by those with the power to solve them, just by way of them having the power to solve them? So
So there are, to get in on this dialogue here, there are some problems. First, you've made an assumption, which there is this large swath of people that actually do know what they're doing, and if they could just simply reach a point of power, then they would fix everything. I actually am not convinced of that either, because, but perhaps. And then secondly, there are some problems that are so massive, right? And this is what people that will argue in favor of climate change or whatever, or and let's keep it away from climate change, because I think YouTube has rules against that now too.
Oh God, yeah, you're right, that. Actually, yeah.
Right. So, well, comets. So there are some problems that I cannot believe that in the year 2022, an American has to be careful with it. And I don't want to overplay that, because a lot of that's hyped up. No, you see a lot of podcasts where they're like, oh, you can't say this. You can, mainly, but whatever. Anyway.
You'll get downvoted, which has already happened to me.
There is no downvote. That was eliminated.
I don't mean downvote. I mean like the algorithm will like obscure you, which
I don't know.
I'm telling you right now, I'm pretty sure it's already happened to me, because I took issue with not recommending, vitamin D and shit. That was it. That's enough. And now I basically
everybody believes this. I don't know.
An exile online. I've been shamed.
What I wanted to make the point is, there are some things that require collective action. Okay, let's put it that way. Right. So like if I found a comet in the sky and I was like, there's a comet in the sky, I can't, though, as an individual, stop the comet in the sky. So we do need larger forces and collective action to some degree to influence some of the larger problems, right? I mean, we would have to.
Yeah.
The problem, of course, comes in, well, so then you take it to a power center or whatever and you say, fix this. And this movie is showing, well, the power centers are so corrupted by incompetence, foolishness. And not only that, though, and this is what I think the movie does well, is that the experts have personal problems that are so great that it actually thwarts their ability to communicate the message correctly. Because Leonardo DiCaprio's character can't speak well. He's just weak. He's a weak little scientist nerd. And the problem is he can't speak to the president. Like, if he had have gone in there in a certain way, he probably could have grabbed their attention and gotten the message across. He's on like a host of drugs. His wife throws them at him when found cheating on him. He's not together. The girl is, you're like this stereotypical millennial stoner, kind of like, oh, I'm really smart, my hair's dyed, but also like I have to do Xanax because I have anxiety. Like hey, and I get it. Like we all struggle, but if those are the experts, then they're going to fail also because they're weak people. So we have a problem.
Okay, fair enough. I think on a certain level, yes. I don't know because, the movie makes kind of this argument. She does say what needs to be said. Like, she's very blunt in many of the interactions in saying what you would want the character to say, what you want Leonardo DiCaprio's character to say, but he doesn't. And she gets ridiculed and kind of, dismissed as being crazy. So there's also that element of like, if you speak out too much, too urgently, well, then you just get dismissed as a crazy person. So it's like, what is it? You need to be perfectly formed to be able to just present a problem to the right people. That's a problem, because no one in this film is perfectly formed. So the idea then is just like, well, if there's any real problem that ever occurs, we will all die because there is no person perfect enough to present it to people. And then the person they present it to is going to be flawed too, which you see in the president. She's more concerned with maintaining her position and is extremely egotistical, which is another part of this film that's important, how it treats the psychology of those in power. And this is a point that I've been thinking about a lot, which is, when I say that there are people that have the knowledge and the skills to address the problems that we're dealing with, but they're not in the positions of power, what I mainly mean is that the positions that can actually create the kind of collective, coordinated action needed to solve very big long-term problems tends to attract megalomaniac type personalities. It doesn't tend to attract the nerdy scientist type with anxiety. And there is an interesting bridge, though, right? Which is the billionaire scientist, like weird, soft-spoken, creepy character. And this is very much, again, this is kind of like, is it Elon Musk? Is that who it's supposed to be? Is it supposed to be fucking Elon Musk? Because that's sure what it looks like. It's like this guy that's like, I'll fix everything with space. And he comes in and is like, da, 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 and everything is like sleek and futurist and don't look me in the eye. Like all this weird shit. It's kind
an
of
amalgamation of Musk,
Bill Gates, whatever, all that
yeah,
type. Yeah. So, fine, fair enough. And there's an interesting commentary on that, though, because this is the person that has more power than the president, ultimately, and ends up causing the cataclysmic extinction event because of this kind of arrogant certainty in their ability to solve the problem single-handedly. So there's a lot of, discerning between science that is corporatized, that is individualized in this sense of like, the guy is a scientist, essentially. I think, he knows things enough to be in this position of creating scientific devices to solve this problem. But he doesn't collaborate with other scientists. And they make this comment that they're firing any scientists that question his methods. And so, there's a lot of this emphasis on like the peer review process, which is like, hey, buddy, even that's fucking degraded at this point. But sure, for argument's sake, we'll, say that would be better in theory if that system is robust and doesn't continue to degrade, as many things are at this point. That is better than one person taking it upon themselves to say, I've got this entire problem figured out. Let's bet on me, which doesn't work in the end. So there's this divide between like a certain expert class, which is maybe this classical image of the scientist, which you have in the the protagonist characters, and then the people in power who are incompetent and who are drawn to power for different reasons. And then like kind of this like melding between the powerful and the scientist, which is like the billionaire scientist type. So that's a problem because, I'm always astounded by how many people are so intelligent, so such great examples of leadership, of insight, of well-developed, balanced personality. But who the fuck do we have in power? Not those people. Those people are doing different things. They're writing books. They're starting organizations. They're doing things privately as private citizens. They're not in these positions of power that can allow them to create this kind of collective action. And of course they're not, because those systems are degraded. If you actually want to get anything done, you're better off doing it as a private citizen starting an organization, not going into this gridlock system where to play ball, you have to, abide by these kind of systems that actually thwart action.
All right, calm down, Ron Paul. What I'm trying to say is that, just joking. And while I agree with a lot of these things, I always try to take a slightly opposite view sometimes, which is, yes, you're right, but there probably are, I would hope anyway, a reasonable amount of competent, reasonably, fairly honest people that are in power, whether it be in business, government, whatever, that we simply don't hear about. Because something this movie does do is it shows the power of image and media. So my assumption, it is an assumption, I don't know this, but there are people that have competency, that are in positions of power, that do keep things running along, I assume. Maybe they don't reach the heights at all times, but I think that they do exist. I hope they still exist. Whether or not they could deal with a comet, I don't know. But so I'm not sure that it's as
I'm a little less
obvious.
optimistic than you on that. I think
but you can't see it. That's all I'm trying to say is that you,
well, then that's
you
a
only
problem,
see the
isn't it?
negative.
Because that means there's perhaps an outsized effect of the negative. We're not seeing the results of these positive individuals in these systems. Are they making an effect? That's my concern.
You can't see it because every time you drive a car across a bridge, you accept the fact that the bridge exists and is supposed to be standing there and runs and won't fall down. So it's only when the bridge collapses, which is rare, that then everything seems to be in complete chaos, because there's this bias towards everything running right. And what I know is the fact, because I've been to some other countries where things don't run right by default, that we still live in a country that has some core competence in some of the things it does. I'm not saying there aren't problems. Trust me, I'm all Ron Paul 2012 too a lot of the times. But I'm just trying to say that, we take a lot for granted, which is a concept that we'll get into towards the next section. But we do, and I think that influences in a way, I think it works out. It's a good trick because it keeps us even more honest, and I'm for the population being mildly angry and mildly concerned and mildly suspicious. I like that. I think that's good. Mildly. Keep in mind the word mildly. Yeah. Because that keeps people accountable, So I'm for that. And I'm for this general idea. But I'm also saying let's not overlook the fact that for the time being, given the circumstances we're in currently in the year January, or the month of January 2022, things have not devolved into complete and utter chaos.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. And I agree with you. And I think that there is the problem when you get too negative and you don't realize that, yes, the bridges work and all of this, because then you don't see what it is worth saving your system for. If you have this perception that your system has done nothing right, then you're very easily convinced that you should just do away with the entire system. And so that warped perspective can make you unable to see what it is that you're risking when you negate or rather, neglect the system. Now, though, one more thing before we move on, a lot of those fucking bridges were built a long time ago. And a lot of the things that we're pointing to as like, look, things work, they weren't built recently. And I think things have changed a lot now, I'm not saying there aren't bridges falling down all of a sudden, but some of them are. Like that happened in Miami. A new bridge collapsed shortly after it was built, but most of them don't. Though I just wonder, how much can we rely on the legacy system that constructed things properly to say that the current system is still functioning? I think, the pandemic put that system to a test, and I think it was miserably failed. It could have been worse. Definitely could have been worse. It could be Australia. That's worse. But it could be Canada. That's even worse. But I
could
was
be
surprised.
China. That's much worse.
That's the worst. But I was surprised that it was as bad as it was, because there's some basic things, right, that we've lost, which is like the proper messaging during an emergency, which is not to immediately divide and shame parts of the population based on your political agenda, but to unify your population. That's generally what the, boring basic messaging during any emergency is, which is we're all Americans, we're all together. Like, that's the fucking step one for any emergency. So the fact that that was dropped and lost so easily is a little bit concerning for the integrity of that system. But let's touch on that idea that everything is superficial, everything is a performance, because that's one of the themes in this film. You have this recurring scene where both of the protagonists go on to the talk show, and they both kind of break down at one point. They're like, we're trying to tell you something fucking terrible, and you're trying to package it as a news sound bite that's maybe interesting and quirky. It's just fucking bad. And so there's this whole element of entertainment throughout the whole film. There's this idea that maybe it is a little bit of a consumerist culture where we're just consuming media, even when that media is about an apocalyptic event. It's meant to be packaged and presented in this kind of like showy way. And I wonder, because one of the problems that you see in the film is this inability of people to take the problem seriously for a very long time until it's basically too late. And there's two sides to that, I think, which is, one, you have a population that thinks everything is entertainment, thinks everything is a performance, that everything is kind of like this regular human attempt to maximize your own gain. Even in the beginning, the president says, when they present like, yeah, this is fucking bad, we're going to need to do something about it, here's things we could do. She says, okay, so what's the sell? This idea of like, okay, here we go. What do you want? Here's what I'll give you. This kind of like bargaining that we think is everyday life. Exactly. But there's another element to this, which is people don't take the problem seriously. There's something
briefly on that point, though, and this is what I was trying to get at, right? And I don't think this is too difficult to understand. And this is why the scientist fails. It seems to me that a person that knows anything could have answered that question really simply and said, the sell is, you're going to be able to be the hero that saves the world. And here's how you're going to do it. You have to talk to people based on what their motivations are. That seems so obvious. And maybe that's a political mindset. And I understand the little scientist doesn't know because he can't express himself hardly even during that meeting. But do you see, it's like this, like.
That's an interesting point, because what you're essentially saying is, why didn't he take ownership of the problem differently? So there's
just use a little psychology.
Well, there's a difference there in the decision about how this problem should be solved, which is he's adamant about giving the problem to the president and making the president see it the way that he sees it. Instead of saying, this bitch is fucking stupid. So I know this problem. So how can I get this problem solved since she is incompetent? There's this inability to grapple with the other person, how they come to you, for better or for worse. And that's an interesting, issue.
It's not even that she's stupid within this film. It's that fake president. Look, and if you're taking about call him Trump, right?
Yeah.
She's not stupid on how to get elected. Mm-hmm. In fact, she's a savvy political animal. Yeah. But going into that situation, wouldn't you know? And again, it's a movie. But what I'm getting at is similar to what you're saying. You don't go in there and just start talking a bunch of data to somebody like that. That person can't understand it. You should know that person can't understand it. I don't know if it's an art or a science or whatever, but there's a way to speak to people, and you have to know beforehand who you're talking to. That's all I was trying to get at. And that then you might actually be able to solve the problem.
Yeah, there's something interesting there, because it's a little bit like a different mode of existence, which is, okay, how about we use this person's strengths for what they are, okay? So maybe a different way that they could have gone about this is like, yeah, this person is a person in power, an egoist that seeks to maintain their power and maximize their popularity with the population, and they're good at it. How can that serve this problem? You know, like there's a different way to go about things instead of immediately coming to an obstacle because it's not the way that you would prefer to solve the problem and then just beating against the obstacle until the obstacle becomes your main obstacle. That obstacle of the president becomes like one of the larger problems, which is we're going to arrest you now. Like now you can't even talk about this. It becomes a miniature war within the sphere of solving the greater problem. So there could have been a different way to say, okay, so we see what your strength and your interests are. Let's subvert that in favor of solving what we care about. Like there's a way to do that with people instead of immediately like this, it has to be my way thing. But I mean, this is kind of like what, you know, yeah, okay, it would be nice if that's how we approach things. But it's almost interesting to think about how fucking far removed that concept even is to work with people's strengths, even though you don't like the way that they're doing something or the way that they are, to see how you can still kind of unify, at least on one level, towards a common goal. How fucking far that is of a concept that we have a movie that this is kind of just, it's not even a conception in the film. And fair enough, that's how they chose to make the film. But I don't see that in our culture even. That's something.
You don't see that in you don't, I mean, well, maybe this is something that we can give to the Silver Eye Society viewers as a way to approach communication with other people. Sometimes you should think about who you're talking to, and it doesn't always have to be confrontational. I mean, to me, that does seem kind of obvious. Like, you would go, now look, they set it up well because they're annoyed already. They've been flown on this plane. The general came in, it's funny, sold them snacks. You know, they've been left waiting there. The son is obviously an imbecile and insulting. Though, within the movie, funny, he actually did a great job. I thought he was actually pretty funny. Another name I had heard, Jonah Hill, I think, but I didn't actually know exactly who it was. But anyway, good job. But, you know, you go in there to the president, you know, you're talking, and hey, you smoking? I like to smoke too. Can I, you know, light up a cigarette, smoke a cigarette with the president, and let's solve some problems, you know? I think that there's nothing, we need to get back to this idea.
I mean, yeah, it sounds right to me, and it probably would have gone better in the film. Maybe the world would have still existed. Yeah. So we can move on now to whether we can ever solve problems again, or the idea of the weakness of the main characters. I think you kind of touched on that already, but that's to reiterate. There's a section where the billionaire character says,
I want to say it. This is my line. You run towards pleasure and away from pain like a field mouse. That was
I like
good.
that character.
It was a good little dialogue, good little comedy.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah,
but it's actually very key.
That are very good.
It's key to what I've been getting at is that many of these people do, because humans do that, and I understand that. He's kind of not quite human because he's that autistic kind of, like, not to say that people with autism aren't human, but but less.
Yeah, he's like weirdly
human
robotic,
skills,
you know? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
he sees clearly this, which is true, that humans act that way, and that there's bad consequences for that. And you see it, and then, you know, DiCaprio's character on a huge amount of, you know, everyone's on. I thought that was good that they put that in there where he takes his Xanax right before he talks, because he doesn't have the wherewithal just to go in and speak, you know, and she grabs it from him and actually takes one of it, you know. Of course, a culture that is devoured by anxiety won't function well.
Yeah, there's a good point to that, right? Which is maybe the problem isn't actually even the comet. Maybe the problem isn't actually even the systems that don't function so well. Maybe the problem is the individuals within that system that make up that system, that construct that system. No matter what system you build, it could be a perfect system. If you fill it with incompetent people, weak people, will it still run well? I mean, I can give you a perfectly made car But if you don't know how to drive, you're still going to crash the car. And it's not really the car's fault until we make a car that is so well designed that it actually doesn't even need the human being to function. And then at that point you say, well, what kind of society is that? A society that functions well without any input or competence from its inhabitants. I wonder about that. One of the things that struck me about this film was that it reminded me kind of like a reboot of Idiocracy. It's kind of like a different, more contemporary flavor of Idiocracy, where someone's trying to solve a problem, but everybody is too stupid or caught up in whatever their issues are, which in that movie is just stupidity, essentially, to solve that problem. So this is a recurring theme, right? Are we getting too stupid? Are we getting too weak? Are we getting too incompetent to even solve problems anymore, despite our systems? So,
yeah, I mean, it's not as simple as just stupidity, though. I would say that it is the human condition to some degree, and the human condition within this new technological media landscape, all these other sorts of problems. So, Idiocracy is more straight up. Everyone has devolved into a point where they can't think anymore. This was good in the sense that each of these people had interpersonal problems that they couldn't solve, which then prevented them from solving the larger problem.
So that's one of the main themes in this movie is, can we ever solve problems again? And we're going to try to wrap up here real quickly, but now that we're at this section, it's very hard to do. So I don't know. That was one of the questions I wanted to discuss, which was, can we solve problems again? Because one of the things that you see in this movie is the inability to agree on a problem, not the inability to solve the problem, the inability to actually agree that there is a problem and that the problem that exists is a problem. You have the whole idea of like, oh, these people deny that there's a problem. You have the idea that, I'm going to use this problem as an opportunity for myself. Maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it's actually an opportunity for personal enrichment, whatever. And so this issue is kind of a cultural issue in a way, because that's what happens when you have so many fractured viewpoints. Such a fractured culture is that it's very hard for anyone to agree on anything at all, even the existence of a problem. And, I think in some ways it's a little too simplistic for the movie to be like, there's a problem, it just exists, like we have the science, because that's not even how fucking science works, okay? Even if you want to talk about the big weather change, there isn't a unanimous consensus on that issue. There are still, debates on when is the cutoff time? How serious is it? What contributes to it? What's the way to solve? I mean, there's a lot of debate, even just on the gravity of the issue, what brings about the issue. It's not always that clear cut with anything. And so maybe one of the things that's useful in solving a problem is coming to it with the understanding that there's going to be a degree of misunderstanding in the problem itself, just as a starting point. You had a good point, though, that when there's too many apocalypses, no one pays attention anymore. And I think that's one of the issues that the film touches on, is that no one seems to care about the problem or take it seriously. And it's like, yeah, well, when you beat your populace over the head with a new problem every day, you can't expect the next apocalyptic headline to grasp them any more differently. And that perhaps is a warning, a boy cries wolf warning about using super inflammatory rhetoric for every fucking issue just because it's convenient and easy to do and getting your point across. And you see that now, which someone gets voted into office and it's like, this is fascism. What the fuck are you talking about? Shut the fuck up. Like, because when real problems happen, no one's going to listen to you because you were already railing on 10 years ago about fascism coming from a democratically elected president or some shit. This is not, things need to be discussed in a tempered, rational way, or else people become desensitized to alarmist rhetoric when there actually is a reason to be alarmist.
But I think that we can. I think that the majority of human beings still do, actually. I think that in this podcast, we do it. I think that the majority of people that watch this podcast would do it. I think that we have a problem that is that the economic incentives of media organizations is to scare the fuck out of everybody. And I understand why they have to, because they need you to
obsessed.
click that headline in order to sell advertising, to exist, to pay their employees, to continue on. So I get it, but that's a problem. And the only way out is to stop listening to it. That's the only way out. You have to, as a population, we have to show those business interests that we don't want that. That's no good. And then they'll change their model because they're doing what they need to do for money. That's what it is. And there was a very very good example of this, where there was a headline that says something like, children hospitalized by COVID has increased 50%. And there were some other podcasters who talked about the Jimmy Dore, I think, looked at it, and some other people. And that was technically true. Technically, kind of. Except it was with, it was just people that had tested. And it wasn't until the ninth paragraph that it said as such. It said none of these kids are actually here because of that, but they tested while they were in for other things. And then it showed that there just happened to be an increase of children relative to adults. So the headline is written one way to make you click. You want to click it because you're like, oh, fuck, that sounds
like
bad. I want to know what's going on. Most people don't read to the ninth paragraph, though. In fact, a lot of people don't even click on the headline. They just read the headline. So, and the people that make this know this. They're not. Sometimes they're legitimately stupid, because I actually think a lot of journalists, they're not paid that well a lot of times, and they're just not that bright. But many are. Many very much are. And so now you have a problem. What am I supposed to do? The person that's doing, it's a real problem for me when I see something like that, because there's two options. There's three options. One is that person wrote that headline that way in order to scare people. And I don't care if they scare me, because I'm not really that scared of it. But it scares people over and over again and psychologically breaks them down. That's a problem. That's number one problem. The other possibility is they didn't know what they were doing. But that's not even possible, because they write it out later in the article. And so it's a major, as long as this atmosphere of writing that way and disseminating media that way continues, this movie could be, this movie will play out, that would play out in reality, maybe not far from how it plays out here.
Yeah, well, that's the point of the movie, is that if there was a real emergency and our systems are the way they are and people are the way they are, this is what would happen. And that's kind of something
I don't think it's wrong.
No,
I'm not sure they're wrong.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it would be that bad, but I mean, I do think that, again, I think the pandemic is should have been a wake-up call and should have been a warning, because luckily this is not a plague. It's not the plague. It didn't kill 30% of the population. So if there was the actual plague, something that really genuinely had a high fatality rate for all of the age groups, especially younger, because that's what really fucks up a society, is when they start losing, a lot of their younger generations, because then they ain't nobody around anymore. That's a problem. Those are the people that work jobs and have families, blah, blah, blah. So if there's something that were to come that were to really, be a hard test upon a society, even more so than this pandemic, well, what the fuck? This is
There's
what
going to
it
be a
is.
huge percentage of people that are just not going to believe it right from the beginning. Number one, because they're tired and they're psychologically stressed from it, And
people
I
would
have
just also
sympathy.
lose their fucking minds, because that's what we saw. So people immediately, took to the streets being like, oh, actually, I'm just going to burn down this building for racism. Get out of here. You've been locked up in your fucking house and you're crazy already. And now you're genuinely going insane. People genuinely started to lose touch with reality and to take it out upon the world around them, whether it be their own partners or whatever the fuck it is. People get crazy when there's stress. And when there's real stress, people get real crazy real quickly.
But they do come to terms with reality faster, because the thing that would happen if there was a severe outbreak of something that had an extremely high fatality rate is, and this is the libertarian argument, the kind of Rand Paul thing, where this, and we'll maybe end on this whole discussion of like, well, should the government mandate a vaccine or a mask or all that? And, you know, this is always a debate. And then someone says, well, but what if Ebola came out? Then wouldn't you want to mandate it? Like, because then it's obvious. The answer has to be, well, yeah, I guess then we would have to agree that the government does it. But the argument from the libertarian side says something like this, which is that if Ebola came out and you actually started seeing people drop dead in the street with blood flying out of their eyes, you wouldn't need a government mandate, because everyone would very much
run
want to be
to the clinic,
would want to do the things, get the vaccines, get the masks, and all that kind of stuff. Look, I get, like, you can go back and forth on this, and there's a lot of gray areas and zones, and but that's the idea there.
Okay, briefly, we're gonna end with the gratitude element of the film, because we're already at the end and we need to put this in here. So I'll touch really quickly on the idea of classic absurdism that I saw in this film, which was there's a moment when people realize that there's a problem, right? Which is kind of touching on that idea that, like, once people see what they see and they cannot anymore say, like, well, I don't know if the media is lying or not. Once you see the fucking comet in the sky, oh, it's real. So there's this moment, right, of this kind of like absurdist hedonism even. The cities actually descend into chaos. So you have like people looting, burning things, like the newscasters are like, should we fuck? Should we get drunk? Should we do heroin or some shit? And they're just like, oh, whatever. It's like the end times type of thing. And you see how it affects everybody differently. And Jennifer Lawrence's character at one time, like this like skater child is like, should we make out? And she's like, why not? That's, absurdism to a degree. It's just like, it doesn't matter anymore. You're going to die either way. So why not? The point of, Camus' absurdism was to, make it something you like, though. Don't just start like, why not? I'm going to loot things. Like, why not? But, drive your car too fast, get in an accident like he did. That type of thing. Enjoy it. Enjoy how you die. But what I liked, though, is that so while the cities are burning and there's all this hedonism going on and they're doing the jump cuts with the hippos and the babies crying and all that, then you come back to what is actually the happiest place in this film, which is also the most mundane. It's a family and friends sitting around a dinner table. And I thought that was such a beautiful image, because there's this chaos, there's this unprecedented event going on, and yet what is more grounding than to return to something that is the most daily, mundane part of life, which is sitting around a table. You end up not wanting to do like, well, I'm going to do all these crazy things that I never would have done otherwise. They choose to do the thing that they could do every day. And then you get this line, we did have everything. We really did have everything, Leonardo DiCaprio says. And so you see that there's this element that while everybody else is losing their minds and dying alone or whatever it is, it's having these rewarding, strong relationships that actually carries these characters to the end in the most dignified, graceful, and rewarding way. Because in a way, then this is what makes the movie so good. This is why the ending is such a redeeming part for the film, is that they choose, at least Leonardo DiCaprio's character does. I mean, he doesn't give the other ones the option, but he chooses not to get on this ship to get out of the planet. And it's the right choice. It actually seems to be the right choice to die with your family and friends, because it's the most peaceful ending. It's terrifying, obviously, and it's pretty brutal, but there's this sense of strength and grace almost in going into being annihilated. So I like that. But you had a bit of gratitude here.
Did you fast forward to the very end, though, and see the actual end of it?
No, I saw the part where they get out of the plane and then they get eaten. So, I mean, you can debate whether that's better or not. I mean, I don't know. There's an interesting part, though, there that's a little bit funny. Meryl Streep's character says, only 48 of us died in here. And, this is a commentary, I think, a little bit on maybe the perspective of a certain elite class that doesn't even view the entire rest of the world as part of the population, because this idea to say only 48 of us died, it's like, no, billions of people died. Only 48 on the ship died. And and she gets eaten right away, though. Is she kind of dumb, though? Because once you got off and you saw a fucking dinosaur, wouldn't you be like, oh, God, this motherfucker told me that I was going to die getting eaten by a brontorok, which obviously sounds like a dinosaur. I would have been like, comedy. Staying on the ship.
You always tell me the last movie when I was talking about I was making things not to do that. But so I have one problem with ungratitude. I won't spend a lot of time on that. It's difficult. It's a challenge, a moment-to-moment challenge. And I said earlier in this podcast that I'm challenged by it, that I've had a problem enjoying things. Mm. But that's against what I think that we should do. I think that line, we had so much we didn't even know it, was right before he was talking about how he liked gourmet coffee. And Jennifer Lawrence was saying she liked, fine teas or whatever. And I like both good coffee and fine tea. And so I understand that. My thinking on this is developing. I don't know the answer, actually. But it's something like, if you can consciously be happy and content with these small things, we call them, whether it's coffee or tea or whatever it is, it doesn't have to be that. It can be whatever it is. It's not just this positive thing. It's a kind of recognition. When you do that, it's this kind of recognition of its opposite. It's if you can correctly align yourself to be grateful for the things you have, it's not all some sort of positive thing. And I know it sounds very new age a lot of times, and I think that people are really into this whole gratitude idea. From a friend of mine told me, said, this stuff is on, like a little Facebook messages or whatever. People make I don't know what people do online. But
yeah, like little graphics that say every day can be the best or whatever, some, quaint messaging.
And I'm not trying to push that. What I'm trying to say is that the apocalypse, the end of the earth, the violence of mass death, right, which you see in this film, is something no one wants to experience and that no one can really conceive of. I've been reading a lot about World War I recently. The details of the violence and the atrocity of that is almost incomprehensible. And terrible. No one wants to experience that, and I hope no one does. I hope there is no apocalypse or breakdown of society, all that kind of stuff. I think that through being grateful for small things, somehow there's maybe this does sound new agey and mystical, but there's some sense in which it wards off those bad things somehow. I don't know. Maybe it's because when you're not consumed by constantly complaining about how everything is, when the fact of the matter is that here in America anyway, not for everybody and not at the moment, but we're like the richest country that's ever existed. And we have a lot of material stuff. And I don't know, maybe there's somehow that people need to consciously have gratitude towards these things because that it's like upkeep for buying in to a system that keeps the bridges from not collapsing.
Yeah, well, it's also clarity, right? It's actually having a clear perspective because it's perhaps naive, even deluded to not realize how bad things can be. So that warps your perspective. And it comes back to that idea of we don't appreciate that the bridges work because they work. And it warps your decision making when you don't realize how much you have to lose. That's perhaps the effect that gratitude has in helping to prevent you from making decisions that would put you in a place where you would lose these things and say, wow, we really did have everything.
Yeah, it's kind of, I know I went on a long tangent there, but it's something like, so I'm reading about war atrocities in Poland during World War I at 5 a.m. That's not something I suggest to most people. It's actually not a viable way to understand how good life is, actually. You shouldn't, most people aren't
there's
gonna do
another
that.
side of that, right? Where you just get so hung up on how bad things can be that it's hard to enjoy how good things are.
So if you can work the other angle, which is just enjoying the small things, the people around you, the things that are going well, we're not evolutionarily programmed, I don't think, to do it though. And that's why it was so difficult. We're programmed to look for things that are going wrong and bad, and that makes sense because in a way it's what I was saying even earlier, is that I kind of want people to be upset and railing a little bit.
Yeah, it's why we keep making things and why we keep progressing, because we keep seeking more and desiring more.
So anyway, I'll end, but I just wanted to ask you one question. I'm sure that many viewers have dropped off. However, I thought it might very important to clear this up in a recent episode of the Silver Eye Society. I made a claim about a potential business opportunity called a space hotel, and I was mocked. By my co-host. And I just wanted to see if you had anything to say, because we're talking about space here. And,
Yeah. Okay. No. There was a recent article, press release, whatever, that came out that apparently there is a space hotel in construction, like already in construction, I believe. I mean, I don't think it's already there. I think it's being constructed, like it's going to be constructed for pretty soon, if I recall. It's not even that far off. Like it would be within our lifetime. So
2027.
Yeah, all I have to say is sorry to you, because someone already beat you to that brilliant idea for a space hotel. All right. Thank you for watching this episode. We leave you with the same message that this film left you with, which is to try to see what it is that we actually have, to enjoy those things. I think that was the best part of the film. I always love that messaging, because we constantly need to remember to have perspective on where we are. Because it's very easy to lose perspective and to ruin your own life, to become miserable of your own doing. So another way to maintain your perspective is to sign up to the Silver Eye Society on Patreon. We provide episodes every week. Each other week goes to patrons. So I'm trying. Just sign up,
Great.
join. It's fucking awesome. What do I need to do? Why do I need to sell this shit?
We're not in any danger of you being a media savvy
I need
manipulator.
Media training.